This session today is ArcGIS Hub Best Practices for Site Creation and Content Management. My name is Emily Nilsson, and I'm the Senior Product Manager on the ArcGIS Hub team, accompanied by my colleagues.
I'm Jay Dev. I'm a Senior Product Engineer on the ArcGIS Hub team.
And I'm Thomas Hervey, Product Engineer on the ArcGIS Hub team as well.
Excellent. All right, so this is an intermediate session. It is targeted at those who are already familiar with ArcGIS Hub. We'll be getting into some details on best practices, on everything from site creation to managing your content effectively to administering your hub. We've got a lot to cover in this session, just a lot of helpful tips and tricks for working with Hub. So we may go through some things a bit quickly, but if you're not able to grab a screenshot in time or something, don't worry, because this is being recorded and it will be made available after the user conference as a reference. We did do a very similar reference as well, and that's available, but we've updated it and added a bunch of new content that we will be covering today. So I will kick us off with an overview of ArcGIS Hub. So our vision on Hub is that we believe communities are better when they work together. And so we have created ArcGIS Hub, which is a cloud-based engagement platform that helps you work more effectively with your communities. And when we say community, we mean anyone outside of your organization. That could be residents, of course, in your community, but it could also be leaders in your community, government leaders, leaders in business, local universities, local nonprofits, anyone outside of your organization that can help you achieve your goals that you can leverage for that. So we break ArcGIS Hub up into 4 distinct areas. We have the sites capability, which is what you use to quickly spin up beautiful websites, to inform and to educate. You can share open data, maps, and applications through the open data part of the product. Those 2 components are with ArcGIS Hub Basic, which comes in your subscription for ArcGIS Online. There is a premium part of the product that brings in that concept of community. So it brings in tools to engage and to collaborate, to work together on teams towards those goals that you're working towards, and to rally around initiatives. So we've got those 2 different flavors of the product. And Hub is an ideal tool to combat this pattern that we so often see. So an organization may have great initiatives that they're working on, but the community isn't aware. External stakeholders are not engaged. The vision that ends up being developed is purely top-down, really not taking into consideration the needs or the wants of the stakeholders who will be affected because they haven't been brought in from the start. And those community members aren't involved, and the result is a lack of trust, not just for that one initiative, but for any future activities that organization is working towards. But what Hub enables is for you to inform that community early on, to engage those stakeholders, and to truly co-create that vision together and get their buy-in at the very beginning. And this process leads to trust. And trust is the critical piece for the success of your organization's goals. So to get into the best practices, we'll start with site creation and branding. So first things first, planning your Hub site. Hub has a fun drag and drop layout editor that you can use to create these beautiful websites very easily and quickly. And while it's tempting to get in there and start tinkering around, we really recommend that you plan first. So answer some of these key questions. Who is your intended audience? Who do you want to be regularly using this Hub? Who are going to be those users who bookmark your Hub site to go back time and time again for new information and updates, wanting to get involved? What are the goals? So what is the purpose of your Hub? What are you trying to achieve? And what resources do you have available for the ongoing maintenance and management of that Hub? Now, time investment certainly varies based on those goals. So once you have a goal in mind, that can be anything from private data sharing within your organization or just within your department, all the way up to deep 2-way engagement and collaboration with those community members. And as engagement increases on that y-axis, of course, time investment increases as well. So again, having a clear idea of what your goal is critical to help keep in mind and inform the level of maintenance and governance that you will need for your hub. And last, again, before you get into the app, sketch it out. So draw your ideas out on paper before getting into the application itself. And yes, I really mean putting pen to paper like I was doing here before I created this site. We'll have a few screenshots of an invasive species management hub site. It's easier to do this first and then build your site to match. And if you want an even easier way to get started, you can start with one of over 40 templates that we have available in Hub. These come with a beautiful site template that's already branded, a lot of great content in there, and many of these come with ArcGIS solutions built in as well, which is an added bonus. Now, one of the first things you want to do, regardless of which option you go with, either using one of those templates or starting from scratch and building your own, is to start by setting a theme. So ArcGIS Hub does inherit the shared organization theme that is set in ArcGIS Online if your organization has done that. You can overwrite that with the Hub theme options that you see off to the right-hand side. But you can use this to create your own color scheme, to customize the base fonts and the heading fonts. And you can use that as the mechanism to help you match the theme of your other web properties, so you can really have that seamless experience between those web properties. But setting the theme first, before you start building and before you start customizing any of those colors, will really help it, it's a lot easier to create that cohesive look and feel of your site. Now, Thomas is going to be going into managing content effectively later on, but one of the site-level configurations you can set is how this content side panel shows up for different types of items. And it's that content side panel on the screenshot of the map, the panel off to the left-hand side. That side panel provides information about the item, the summary, the item type, important dates, but you can control whether it's open or closed by default based on the item content family, whether it be apps, maps, datasets, documents, or surveys. Now, you've put a lot of thought and time into creating your hub site, into bringing all that content into it, and you want users to stay there. You want them to stay within your hub site, right, to keep exploring and discovering new things. So when you have the embedded apps and embedded links settings enabled, users will see applications and those items registered as document links directly within your hub without being taken to another application or website. And analytics are a very important part of Hub as well. We do highly recommend that you have the Hub activity tracking enabled. This collects anonymized usage data for your Hub site, and it populates the engagement dashboard that you can see there. Last month, we made a change to switch what was powering this engagement dashboard from Google Analytics to our own Esri managed telemetry service. So Google Analytics, they deprecated Universal Analytics just at the beginning of this month, and they moved over to Google Analytics 4. But Google Analytics also had a number of security issues, sampling issues. So Esri, over the past 18 or so months, has built its own telemetry service that is now powering that engagement dashboard. You can still use a number of third-party analytics, so you can bring your own Google Analytics 4 account, Adobe Analytics, Site Improve, and connect those and have those work in conjunction with the Hub activity tracking. And of course, another best practice, anytime you're collecting that usage data, even if it is anonymized, a good idea to let your site users know that you're doing so. So we provide this consent notice option. It's fully customizable, but that gives end users the ability to accept that tracking or to reject it if they so choose. Now, one thing we just recently added to this, that new blue button that you see on there, is the ability to subscribe to receive weekly updates on your site engagement. So you can get those key insights and several more directly to your inbox. We've added a few other metrics like top refers and top downloaded items. So for any Hub Premium users, you now have this option to subscribe to receive these weekly emailed telemetry reports. Now, this is just the first instance of engagement insights that you'll be able to subscribe to, so stay tuned for more. The next section is on managing domains. So a huge benefit of Hub sites is that they allow you to configure a custom domain. And we do recommend this to maintain consistency across your web properties. By default, Hub comes with a default URL. It's either hub.arcgis.com or opendata.arcgis.com. And your org short name is pre-pended to that URL. If you choose to go the custom domain route, which a lot of customers do, a few things to keep in mind. That must have the CNAME set to hub.arcgis.com. Hub issues that security certificate, but it can take a full 24 hours for that to take effect. So don't worry if it doesn't happen immediately. It can take a full day for that to happen. But a very important point to note, custom domains exist alongside that site default URL that comes out of the box with Hub. It does not replace it. So even if something happens to your custom domain, you will always have that default URL as a backup to be able to go in and still access your site. So write that default URL down somewhere. Don't lose that, because that will be your backup policy for this. Now, question for the audience. For those who have created Hub sites before, how many of you have a duplicate or like have you cloned a site to test some things or made a backup of something? Hands raised. Okay. Decent number of people. Okay, this is very, very important. So these are meta tags. We recently added the option to add meta tags within the settings panel within the layout editor. Meta tags provide information to help control how your site will appear in search engines. If you have two sites with pretty similar content, your search engine optimization or SEO takes a hit. A search engine like Google will see that. Your ranking will take a hit there. So we take a screenshot take a photo of that, because you can use the little code snippet that's in that blue box. Add that into that meta tag section on any duplicate sites you have, not your production site, just those duplicates or clones, anything that you've created in additional to that main production site. That snippet will prevent those duplicate sites from being indexed by search engines, so it will not affect your SEO. I'll wrap up with a few layout editing tips. The first one being, and this may be, in my mind, in my experience, the most important one, use the row card liberally. So the row card is really what is the building block of your Hub site, the different building blocks that make up all the different parts of your Hub site as you're building that layout. Every layout card is nested inside of a row card. Those row cards can have background images, they can have different colors, so they're a really nice way to visually distinguish the different types of content on your Hub site. So a user, it's easier for them to understand as they're scrolling through, and it's more visually appealing to have that content broken up. And it reduces the risk for accidental deletion of content. So imagine if you just have one row, and I say this from personal experience, if you just have one row and you pull in a bunch of cards, if you delete that, all your cards go away. Whereas if you have row by row by row, it's a lot easier to recreate anything that may be accidentally deleted. Another nifty thing with rows is you can limit visibility to specific groups. So you can have a version of your Hub site that is exclusively for those people who are in a group, and once they sign in, they can see rows that are hidden to the general public. So it's a really nice functionality there that you can customize for certain types of people. Mobile responsiveness is also critical. So over the past year, I was checking around Google Analytics, and this is Google Analytics across all public Hub sites, many of which I bet a bunch of your sites were included in that stat. But 35% of Hub site visitors were on mobile phones or tablets. So mobile responsiveness and keeping in mind a good mobile design is really important when you're building and laying out your Hub site. So Hub is mobile responsive out of the box. Everything we put into the product is purely mobile responsive, but there are a few additional things that you can do to provide a really great mobile experience to your end users. Several of the layout cards, like the map card that you see here in the middle, have an option to either hide that layout card or to configure a completely separate mobile experience for that layout card. The spacer card as well, off to the right, has an option to hide on mobile. So spacers are what you use to add some additional space around the text and content on your Hub site. They look great when you're looking at the site on a desktop. But when you're on mobile, it can be a lot to scroll through. So you can hide those as mobile, and we recommend doing so just to prevent that additional scrolling. And one additional thing that we've added is a device preview. So now, from that Save button, if you go into the draft preview, you can see your site on different size devices, like a tablet, a mobile phone. You can even see the landscape version of the phone, but you can scroll through on these different sized devices and preview what your site is going to look like. Just another tool to help make sure that your site looks great on all different size screens. A few remaining general layout editing tips. So work on a single tab. Even just talking to a few folks in the booth over the past few days, I've heard stories of people who were working in multiple browsers or multiple tabs, and they accidentally overwrote some of what they had created. So work on a single tab when you're in edit mode. It's also a good idea to communicate with your teammates or any of your collaborators when you're editing a site to let them know that you're going in and making changes, because the way Hub is architected now, it is possible to overwrite someone else's work. I will note, we are working on this. We are working on a concept of layout versioning that is going to help alleviate some of the issues that come as a result of this ability to concurrently edit. Second tip is to use out of the box tools as much as possible before resorting to custom solutions. And you can always preview untested changes on a clone of the site or page before you publish it. But again, if you make that clone, make sure you're adding those meta tags to that clone of the site. And last, Hub releases updates to the product almost every week. And so if something suddenly looks off, we have a change log that includes all the different changes that we've made to the product with that most recent release. And you can always have a look at that to see if there are any applicable updates mentioned. And the last concept I wanted to share was feedback on when to use a page versus a project. So we just released an amazing new feature in Hub called projects, which you can see on the right-hand side here. Projects are a new way to showcase specific, time-bound, goal-oriented, team-oriented activities. Unlike pages, which have a fully flexible and customizable layout that you create with that layout editor, this new item called projects, they're form-based and they're templated. So they're fast to create, they are location-based, and they have additional features like a built-in timeline. So I hope some folks in the room were able to attend this session on this yesterday. Jay and our colleague Hershey led a session on managing and collaborating with your community around projects. I see a few nods. It was recorded, but highly recommend that because they go into detail on how to leverage this new item called projects in Hub and what you can do with it. So I will now pass it off to Jay.
Thank you, Emily. So as you're working on sites, you may want to bring in colleagues to help manage the content that appears. We've seen that this is the best path forward for scaling a hub, ensuring that others within your organization feel empowered and invested, so the effort to maintain content does not fall on one or a few people. First, let's talk about ArcGIS Online organizations. If you have ArcGIS Online, like Emily was saying, you already have at least Hub Basic. There are no additional licenses needed to start using Hub. It's part of the Essential Apps bundle alongside dashboards, map viewer, experience builder, story maps, and more. If you see those apps, you have Hub. If you only have Hub Basic, you have a single organization to work with your coworkers and contractors. But if you've purchased Hub Premium, you get a second organization for your community, however you define community, whether those are partner organizations who don't have ArcGIS Online licenses themselves or members of the general public. You get to decide. This creates a permeable barrier between you and your community. Content and users that are private within your employee organization will remain that way, but you'll be able to share content and collaborate with community users very easily. And even better, you will be able to administer and manage your community with their own pool of user licenses and credits they're not pulling from your original org. There are a few key user roles that are useful within Hub, which you will see in our documentation. Hub administrators are any user with a default administrator role in your employee organization. There are some actions like enabling collaborative events and creating core teams that you'll see in Hub's user interface, asking for a Hub administrator to do on behalf of others. That's who we're talking about. Similarly, the community administrator is any user with a default administrator role in the community organization in Hub Premium. Members of the employee organization can also have a community administrator privileges. They can have a community administrator account in the community org, even if they're not administrators in the employee organization, so that they can manage and auto-add community members to core teams and supporting teams. Below the admins are site managers. This is a custom role that we suggest that is based on the default publisher role, plus a couple additional privileges that I'll discuss in a moment. But any user who's creating and managing sites or initiatives themselves should have this role. And all other core team members should be default publishers. That site manager that I mentioned, that's a custom role that's based on the default publisher role. In addition, this user has administrative privileges to create groups with update capabilities, and that's what allows them to actually create core teams by themselves without needing to call in an admin. And also assign members, which allows them to bring in colleagues to the core team automatically without needing to wait for an invitation to be accepted. That speeds up the collaboration process quite a bit. That being said, we generally suggest, other than that one role, sticking to default roles when using Hub, especially using the publisher role as a baseline. And we suggest this for two reasons. One is that when new privileges are introduced within ArcGIS Online, default roles are more likely to have those privileges applied appropriately. If you're using a custom role of your own, there's a very good chance that that privilege will be added and turned off by default, and you'll have to go in and update that for all of your custom roles. It's a lot easier if you don't have to worry about that by using default roles. The other reason that we suggest this is for you to have a good experience within Hub. While we're designing and building Hub, we account for individual privileges, but any new functionality is really kind of tied to default roles and their associated permissions. If you've scaled back permissions of your users, we can't guarantee that you won't get emailed 5 times a week by Paul in accounting asking why he can't do something. So, sorry, Paul. If you choose to set users, particularly community users, at a level below publisher, proceed carefully. The default data editor and viewer roles we've seen actually don't have the ability to join groups in other organizations, which means they will receive an error if they try to follow an initiative. So in this case, you really should create a new role and import it from either the partner data editor or partnered viewer templates that exist in ArcGIS Online. If you want your community users to have kind of restricted access, be sure to use these roles and not the default ones. Zooming out from users, let's talk about groups. There are a few fundamental groups that you'll see in ArcGIS Online if you're using Hub. Let me explain them to you so you have a sense of why they're there. The first is the content group of the site. This group is used to power the content catalog of a site. Any item that's shared to that group will appear in the site's catalog, and Thomas will be telling you more about this in a moment. You may also see core team groups for the site that you're working on. These groups are general administrator groups of the site. Anyone in this group can edit the site and its pages, and they'll also have the ability to manage content in the content catalog and manage and message followers. One thing that I'll highlight is that you should not add users to the core team via ArcGIS Online. That's really important. Please don't do that. Please do it in Hub, as it will make sure that users who are added to the core team receive all of the necessary access they need to the site. In Hub Premium, you'll also see followers groups. These are tied to the follow buttons that appear on a site. When a user follows an initiative, they're basically telling you that they're interested in staying up to date and learning more. And core team members can directly send email messages to followers with updates on what's happening. There's one other type of group that I think it is worth talking about alongside core teams for collaboration. And this is kind of specific to Hub Premium. Like I said before, the core team provides full administrative access over the site, its pages, content catalog, followers. That's a lot of power. We heard from you all a few years ago that you wanted to way to give a set of colleagues or community members access to manage and work on a small section of the site without gaining access to the whole thing. So in Hub Premium, core team members can create supporting teams with either view or edit privileges. These groups allow for more narrow view or edit access over content relevant to the site. So for instance, supporting teams can be granted access to pages of their own that they can edit and manage without needing to be given administrative keys to the entire site itself. Supporting teams can be accessed by team members via the team profile, and I talked a little bit more about this in yesterday's session, but I'll give a quick overview here. This team profile is an out-of-the-box landing spot for team members. The profile can highlight the scope of the team's work and make it easy for team members to find the content that their teammates are working on. These profiles can be made private, so only members of the team can get to them, or they can be made public if you want to have a lot of transparency to the public on who's working on this. Provide a human face to your work. Team profiles can be easily linked to from a site or a page using the team card. This card respects the visibility of the team profile, meaning it will dynamically show or hide only those teams that the site visitor has access to. Finally, team profiles are a great way for collaborators who are not very familiar with GIS to contribute their own content. From the team profile, team members can share content either by selecting an app or map or another item that's in ArcGIS Online already, or by uploading a file from their device. This upload experience is a little bit more user-friendly than the one in ArcGIS Online, and is great if you want Cheryl from Community Engagement to share that announcement poster she's been working on. Thank you, Cheryl. Another exciting premium feature that we've released in the past year is team discussions. I demoed this yesterday in our collaborating and engaging with your community tech session, so again, I'll be brief here, but if you're interested, check that out. Users can begin a discussion on any type of item in ArcGIS Hub, whether that's a data set, a web map, an app, a dashboard, even a document. Group managers can decide whether they want their team to be able to participate in discussions, and they can restrict that. Same goes for the items and the sites. Item owners and site managers can set whether or not they want to allow or restrict discussions. And now these are private team-based discussions. These are conversations that if you create a post, your teammates and only your teammates will be able to see that. Discussions in Hub supports familiar features like posts and replies, reactions, and at mentioning. And when you at mention someone, that sends an email notification to that user with a link to the post or reply that goes directly to that specific post or reply that's calling for their attention. Discussions are geographically aware, so post authors can tag one or more points, lines, and or polygons. You don't have to just pick one type of shape. You can mix and match when discussing spatial data or maps. And finally, we're releasing more tools to keep conversations constructive and on topic. Upcoming moderation features include block word lists and auto-hiding abusive posts. Here, I'll pass it to my colleague, Thomas.
All right. Thank you, Jay. A lot of actually very exciting things about Hub Premium. We would really like to talk to you more about them, and if you have any questions on any of those features, come by our expo booth. We will still be there for the remainder of the day. So building on what Jay and Emily were discussing earlier, a lot of effective content management is heavily dependent on your workflows, your goals, and everything that you already have in place today. So I want to highlight, like Emily said with goals earlier, consider how you actually want to communicate and publish your plan. Now, a lot of this is constructed as though you are creating a new site for the first time, and many of you have already created many sites. But I would suggest, even with sites you have created, take a step back and consider what the most important things are for your flow, your workflow, your site, and then consider how you might make changes to that workflow. So for starters, we always suggest reviewing ArcGIS Online and Hub Web Help for best practices. We really do have a lot of frequently answered questions, frequently asked and answered questions, and a whole content section that has been updated, including changes to how search works, how download configurations work, and I'll give a link to download specific pages soon. Identify exactly what your management priorities are and internally document and socialize that workflow. So for example, are you focused on low maintenance? One of the biggest things we recommend is limit and manage just a few groups and content within ArcGIS Online. If it's possible, don't have tons and tons of groups. Limit the number of groups that you have, and you'll only have a few people who have access to managing that content. 1 or 2 points of contact is usually much better than trying to coordinate with too many people. What about fast updates? We recommend creating items that only have one layer under them. And then if you are advanced enough to script any sort of updates in your workflows, this includes publishing directly from Pro, coming from ArcGIS Server, any different ways where you can kind of automate the process, that's fantastic. But at a minimum, certain configurations like limiting one layer per item, and that way whenever there's a change to that layer, it doesn't impact the metadata on the rest of the service for a bunch of other layers, like updated dates, editor specific things. Or maybe ease of updates. Once again, if you are metadata savvy, we recommend working with the out-of-the-box ArcGIS Online metadata profiles. There actually is a new beta metadata editor that we're trying to unify across all of the Esri products, Pro, Online, Enterprise. It's a great new user interface. All of that's in ArcGIS Online. Check that out and try to stick with whatever best practices you can off of that. And again, related to faster updates, try to limit multi-layer services. We just find that a lot of times users, if they only have 1 or 2 layers and services that have dozens, maybe even like hundreds of layers, it becomes very hard to manage any sort of changes or migrations if you need to update that data rapidly or even migrate those layers to a different environment. So content management choices. Again, as I said earlier, a lot of this really depends on your existing workflows. And while I'll give some suggestions of what tends to work the best, it really depends on your current infrastructure and what bounds you have to make some changes, right? So I like to use this section as almost like a Q&A for myself. I'll say, where should I manage content? It really depends. Should it be in ArcGIS on Enterprise, Online, or in Hub? It really depends on the purpose. So I would say manage the content as close to it as you can. So any power users that have worked with lots and lots of data, lots of open data, work and manage the metadata layers configuration in Enterprise or ArcGIS Online. But if you have a lot of collaborators, especially those who are not GIS savvy, work more within ArcGIS Hub. We have the content library there for a reason, so out of the box you can add and remove content very easily, make small metadata updates, things like that. Following on is how should I actually manage metadata? Again, I would say that it really depends on the requirements and really the richness of your metadata. So we typically find that most folks who are experienced with Pro, they have a full publication pipeline. If you want to do advanced metadata editing, keep most of that within Pro and earlier parts in your publishing pipeline, and then ultimately in ArcGIS Online is kind of the last stop. We do support out-of-the-box content details editing in ArcGIS Hub. Very easy on the fly if you want to make changes while you're on a mobile device, change the title, tags, categories, summary description, don't like the way something looks, that's really good for an ArcGIS Hub. But anything that requires a large amount of formal metadata editing, at this time, we recommend doing that earlier on in the pipeline and then up to ArcGIS Online kind of as the last stop. And then a big question that comes up a lot is management of services, right? Again, depends on what bandwidth you have to migrate services, what your schedule looks like within your organization. But generally, we have found that transitioning to cloud managed services provides a lot of enhancements faster out of the box. And that comes particularly in handy if you have a lot of content and you want to showcase a lot of open data for downloading, filtering, things like that. So in general, if you have questions on this, we can talk a bit about why that is, but at a high level, easier creation, management, and actually access of like layers. We get feature enrichment sooner because ArcGIS Online is releasing more frequently than Enterprise, and then better download performance. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So I'm going to shift a little bit back to kind of the end experience before we talk about downloads and interoperability. Search and discovery. This is a part of the application that has been around since the beginning of Hub. And the biggest best practices we say here are consider what your goal is and how you want to present the content in your catalog. Okay? End users are happier when they're guided to content or they're given a very simple, clear browsing experience, right? So on the left here, we have a gallery card. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. This is on that invasive species example site. And there's just 3 cards, front and center, very clean, nothing else around it to kind of distract users. And that'll take you right to the content, which is really good to showcase the most important things. Next in line is, of course, in the middle there is the search and category cards. Really good at saying, I've got a couple different topics in mind, ideally 1 to 2 words. They're quickly linked to that tag, category, or group that you've already pre-filtered to, and then users don't have to browse through the entire giant search catalog. But of course, putting a giant search bar up front is a very intuitive way to get people directly into content and exploring. So on the right there, that's actually a preview of our beta new search view, which I will talk about in just a moment. But again, presenting this content really depends on what you want your users to do, and often the number of items that you have. So if you have very few and you just want to showcase things, use the category card or embed an app or map card directly onto your site. If you have dozens or even hundreds of items, we recommend putting your category cards, search cards, front and center so users can get into that data and start exploring more. Okay, and onto that search view. So a browsing-based experience, right? Search is a very powerful tool. Okay, there's all sorts of things that you can do with it today, but it has needed a refresh for quite a while. So coming soon, we're aiming for later in the fall of this year, we're going to release an improved search view. You can actually access it today by navigating directly to your site's URL /explore. The current search page is at /search. So the new beta one is on /explore. If you're authenticated, you'll see a prompt when you go to search to try out the new experience, and you can always toggle back and forth between the classic and the new one to see some of the major features. Some of the biggest highlights will appear in a modal that when you first land on that page, and you can view content in a gallery, not just a list. You can filter by nested organization categories. There's a location facet as well for filtering by location, the extent of the items in there. And you're browsing your items, not necessarily just all of your layers, so we're no longer doing the exploding of layers going out. There's additional enhancements on there. I really encourage you to check it out and come give us feedback on it. When this is fully released, we're going to have a plan to do in-app notifications to say, hey, this older search page is going away, and everything will basically be replaced on that /search route. So Explore right now is just kind of in the beta phase. All of that functionality, which is actively being worked on, will be ported over to /search. So check it out. We'd love to hear your feedback on it. All right, interoperability. This is an area that sometimes folks have no idea it exists within Hub, right? Taking your content and using it externally outside of Hub. Right now, Hub has what's called Hub feeds. If you are on the search page, and you'll see there's a little in-page action on the left side, and you click that little RSS icon, it'll open up a modal, and you'll have access to our geo RSS, 2 different forms of DCAT, and most recently OGC API records conforming search API. You can do configurations on that feed itself so that you can have exact literal values for your metadata. You can template them, and then you can even have fallbacks. This is basically I would say the bread and butter of getting your content out there for reuse in other places, right? And I'll go into more detail on the OGC API records one in a moment, but a last call out, we've gotten a lot of questions about people saying, how do I get my open data really out there and easier for people to see in the Esri ecosystem? The last recommendation is if you have a group with a bunch of content on it, you should have a setting to enable open data, and when that's there, that content is added automatically to our hub.arcgis.com site, And that's all considered open data for anybody to use, see, and reuse directly from one location. Okay, so this is new. This actually was released, over 6 months ago, but we've been slowly getting feedback on the utility of it. It is our new search API. It conforms right now to the OGC API records draft specification, and it has a lot of different purposes. You can do a lot with it. For starters, you can query and search the catalog programmatically instead of going directly through the UI, needing to filter and export things like that. We support a large array of filters, basically everything that you have directly through the UI and even more. And if you're not familiar with OGC API records, OGC APIs is like really where OGC is trying to push all of their standards towards, and records is meant to be for spatial and non-spatial data, which a lot of hub sites have. So we're looking for feedback on the utility of it. If there's any improvements you need to make, that we need to make your workflows easier, love to hear about that. Some direct applications include actually loading a collection from a hub site into ArcGIS Online Map Viewer. So if you actually add import data, you'll select the OGC features option. We're looking for talking with online to expand that to saying OGC records, but you select OGC features, select a collection like data, documents, and any of those where an item has an extent, that will be loaded automatically onto there. So it's intended to promote reusability of the catalog within other Esri tools. All right, and so my last section is on configuring downloads. We know that downloading is an incredibly important feature, and it always has been, right? Some of the best practices are really oriented around configurations of the servers that you manage or how you plan to have updates to your content. So for starters, this is a QR code that'll link you to one of our pages in our web help for download settings. I'm going to talk through some server configuration best practices, as well as a few others just to know about how our system is working. So for starters, if you do have ArcGIS server and you're publishing through that flow, we don't have a lot of visibility into the settings that you have put in place. So if you start finding that there are some issues that we need to troubleshoot, many times it's because of one or two settings on your service. So at least to start, let's talk about the data. We do recommend wherever possible, you limit the number of records that you have, the number of columns that you have, and the geometry complexity for any one layer. It's very appealing to have one giant layer to rule them all with millions of records and very complex geometry. But we do find that when it's on ArcGIS server, this is very, your performance is very dependent on the underlying hardware that you have. So we'll find end users saying, hey, my downloads seem to be taking a very long time, what's happening? And oftentimes it's because you have such a large single layer. So we recommend breaking those up as much as possible thematically by time ranges, geographic extents, and more. We also find that sometimes customers will put in spatial references that don't actually use numeric numbers. It's sometimes they'll have values in there that are characters or spaces or other things like that. That can cause a problem when we're actually running a download job. So check just to make sure that you are in a spatial reference that is readable by the system. And then the last is really, once again, go back to our ArcGIS Online web help to look for more of those performance tips. We've got specifics on setting max record counts, for setting different configurations on capabilities. Most of those things can be found in our online web help. Two of the biggest things we know about with troubleshooting are because certain settings are not turned on. We've worked with Enterprise and online to try to get these turned on by default, and it hasn't happened yet. So if you have management workflows where you can't turn these on, let us know. We'd like to know why. But in general, where possible, try to enable extract as a capability and editor tracking. These both allow Hub to know when content has been updated. We'll have a last edit date of the data and the metadata, so we can check if our cache is out of date or not. And then extract capabilities will allow you to use a function called create replica. You can do this directly on the server. We've found that it's significantly more performant with large, complex data sets, and it's how we're trying to push the entire Esri platform towards kind of a universal download system from dashboards and other applications as well. And the last is, when possible, such as if you're publishing from Pro, enable feature access or publish as feature services instead of map services. Okay? This is because out of the box, feature services have just more capabilities and more support. But again, all these improvements to our downloads are very focused on hosted feature services first, and we're going to bring it more towards enterprise environments with future releases. The last thing is, how does Hub actually update data? I can give an in-depth discussion at the booth on this, but general things to know are that Hub has its own search index for public content. We're working on making this more and more robust, but any time that the public content's metadata has been changed, Hub will get a notification and we update and refresh our index. So we recommend that when you change data, change the metadata as well. This could be as simple as a description saying this is when the data was updated. And the last thing is, right now, Hub does run off of a caching system for downloads. The first time that there's an update to the data and users need to click a button to interact, download things, it'll take a little bit longer because it's actually recreating that cache. And the last thing in my section is the new download experience. We presented on this last year. It's still in beta. You can enable it on an item-by-item basis, and we're starting with hosted feature services to begin with. So we recommend that if you have any of those, check it out. It does require that that extract capability is enabled. But once that is, we're going to do a survey over a couple months, see what workflow kind of migration strategies are necessary, and then do a full release that any services that have that enabled by default will use this new system. Performance and reliability are the key here, and you will automatically get new formats out of the box. All right, so I'll transition it back over to Jay to talk more about administration before we start wrapping up.
And I'll keep this quick so we can get to your questions. The last thing we want to go over are some tips to manage your organization, and this year we're going to focus a little bit more on the community side. So starting with managing community members in Premium, we often get a question of, how do I manage all of my community members? Our general sense is that it's best to do that at the site level to begin with. Because in part, this provides context about how they've entered your organization and what they're interested in. If you go to a site's community, you'll see all of the users who've chosen to follow an initiative, whether they are users from your employee org, your community org, or an entirely different ArcGIS Online organization. If you do allow people to follow your initiatives, please make sure to keep them in the loop. They've followed it to get updates, give them updates. Provide periodic updates by sending them messages on what's new. You can also share content specifically with followers, and this can be helpful to ensure that users have signed up for a named account before filling out a survey, that you want to know who entered each submission. If you'd like to manage all of your community members at once, this is best done by signing into the community organization's ArcGIS Online portal. And when you do that, be sure to sign in using a community admin account. This is helpful primarily if you want to do things like manage privileges, user profile visibility, licenses for your community members, but most other use cases like adding members to core teams or supporting teams are best done in Hub, because Hub is well built to go across that organizational divide. This brings me to my last slide and a key point. Thomas talked about doing some power user things in ArcGIS Online or in Enterprise or in Pro, but for a lot of things, if it can be done in Hub and ArcGIS Online, do it in Hub. There are often several items or groups that we're updating simultaneously, and it's easiest to keep things in sync by using the Hub interface. This includes things like renaming and deleting sites and pages, or adding users to groups. One additional note is to be mindful of the 512 group limit for every user. Every user in ArcGIS Online can only be a member of 512 groups. We don't see this often, but when we do, it's often for admin users who've created a bunch of groups for other users. If you're unable to join or create a group, check how many groups you are in. Finally, if you're working at a pretty large scale, like making the same change to hundreds of pages, or you want to do something that's complex, like cloning a site layout from Enterprise over to Hub, or transferring a site and its pages and its groups to another user while maintaining sharing, we have a Python library called HubPy that can help. That may seem daunting, but our intrepid colleague Manashi Majumdar does a really good job not only keeping it up to date, but also creating pre-written notebooks that can be copied and reused just by changing a couple key fields. And the QR code here is a link to the examples that she's posted. Those are really great Jupyter notebooks. So that brings us to the end of our formal presentation. We're really glad that you were able to join us virtually or in person. If you have more questions, please feel free to stop by our booth. But we'd also like to hear some of your inspiration. If you have ideas of things that you're working on, please let us know, or things you want to show off, please let us know. Stop by our booth for the rest of the day today. We'll be there. And if you want some of the resources that we've shared, the QR code right here is a place to go and find a lot of the resources we published on a UC site that we created using Hub.
All right, so we're going to go to Q&A. So we have about 10 minutes to answer a few questions. I'm going to start with a few online, and then I'll get to in person. So you are joined by almost 500 folks online as well. So great audience. Thank you both online and in person for joining. The first question we'll cover is, what version of Hub are you demonstrating? And is the tracking available for Hub Basic or Hub Premium? So Hub is a SaaS product we release every week, nearly every week, not around holidays. But whatever we're demonstrating is the most recent version of Hub that's available. So we made sure to get up-to-date screenshots and any of those new features that we were showing. The tracking that I was showing at the beginning of the presentation, that Hub activity tracking, that is available for both Premium and Hub Basic. Another question online, were our projects available to Basic as well? Projects are available with Hub Premium. So reach out to your account manager and talk about getting that if that's something that would benefit you. One question that got a few upvotes, and Thomas, this is for you. Can I check how many times an item is downloaded?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've heard this a lot, actually, and my first answer is yes. There's a number of ways that you can do that. So to start, if you have one of those third-party analytics platforms like Google Analytics, SiteImprove, we do track internally, like the number of downloads based on format, file type, user type, and all that. We have a schema that, especially with like Google Analytics, will log that's based on categories, actions, labels. So anything that falls under interaction as a category, action as download, you'll see a number of different labels that include things like a successful download, a failed download, and then the different dimensions for each of the different types on there. So that's an option you can do if you have a third-party tool. We don't publicly show off the taxonomy for that, but if you are looking into like the developer tools, if you're savvy enough to do that, you can see every time when a download button is clicked and wait for it to finish, it'll log an interaction, collect an interaction through like Google Analytics and show you the details there. So when you're done, for example, in Google Analytics, you go to your dashboard and filter by those events. And the events would be under the interactions and then download as the action. As Emily was showing off earlier, we do have newsletters, which is a new premium-only capability. It's intended to give you those metric insights directly into your inbox. And within that right now, we were testing out a proof of concept of what are the other metrics people want besides just viewers, average time, like sessions, number of sessions, time on sites. So in addition to those, we do already list in those email reports top downloaded items, top content views, the numbers of them, and how to link directly to them. So please do check that out if you have Premium. We're aiming to add those metrics back into the site level dashboards as well. I'm not sure about the plans on doing that on the individual items themselves because those also have dashboards, but it's very likely we'll have dashboards as well where you can click on the item when you're authenticated and see those top metrics for things like downloads, shares, and so forth.
Awesome, thanks Thomas. All right, let's turn it to the room. Folks with questions. All right, yeah, you in the front.
Hi, so I was wondering as far as when you're editing text modules in Hub, is there any plans for the modules that are made in Calcite to make those, I'm trying to think the best way to word this. I've had to do a lot of kind of like ad hoc HTML to edit things like, for drop-downs especially, like the colors and the fonts, and is there any plans in the future to make that a little bit more, for lack of a better term, user-friendly?
And so are you talking about when you're...
Repeat the question.
Oh, sorry. Well, it was kind of get there. So the question was on use of calcite components within the text card. So being able to pull those components in directly to the text card, right? So the question was, will we be able to support more customization of those with the color and such and other...
Typefaces, fonts, things like that, yeah.
And font and typeface and such. That is not currently possible from my understanding. It's something I haven't heard a use case for that before. So please come up and talk to me after, because I'm keen to see more what you're trying to do and how we could possibly support that. And if other folks have a similar need, please let me know. But glad to hear that you're using the calcite components in the text card. That was also something we added over the past few months, so that's awesome. Yes, in the front as well.
So I have data that is in our database on site in our office, and I have since taken that data and uploaded it to ArcGIS online and then put it on my website for people to be able to download. My question is, whenever I update my data on site, how can I get it to where it is automatically updated as well on the hub site?
Sure, I can repeat the question and say, so the question is, if I have, my content is hosted in my own enterprise database or other database, it's published to ArcGIS Online, how do I get it so that Hub will have that automatically updated, right? So a couple things. First are, as often as possible, if it is published as like a feature service with those settings that are turned on, especially with editor tracking, the service itself will put a date timestamp on it that'll say, this is when the data was updated, this is when the metadata was updated, and Hub uses that to change the UI to say, hey, a new download file is in place here, it'll take some time to generate versus not knowing. Currently, there is no like technical process that we have where as soon as the data is updated, that the cached file in the download system for Hub is automatically updated. And part of the reason for that is, if you can imagine that you have, let's just say like even hundreds of services, and you've got a bunch of different layers within them, if you're constantly updating data, it'd be pretty taxing to create new updated replicas of that data constantly, especially if you don't even know that users are downloading and updating them. So again, at least at the current architecture, the first time a user will go in and click the button to download something, it'll take time to generate that file, but from then on the cache is updated, and it'll stay that way until it has to check for another update as well. We are contemplating in our kind of medium-term roadmap of doing actually scheduling updates of download files. So if you have a time period that you know you regularly update to, let's say it's once a week, maybe it's never, so you don't even want us to talk to your services, or once a day, you can schedule that on an item-by-item basis to say, great, I've updated the data, we'll have Hub go in, update the cache so that the first user will be able to download that one immediately. But if you've got more specific questions about the workflow, happy to talk to you at the expo or after this, if that's okay. Yep.
All right, I see a hand in the back. Yeah.
Just wondering if you could elaborate on the bridge, again, between organizational account and a Hub account, where we're publishing to a GIS server that's then being put or being visible in our enterprise account. But we want the Hub account to be a filtered version of that posted feature service. Is that common? Is that a common workflow where we're going to create a view of that in the Hub account if it is going to be a filtered version of the original feature service?
I can answer that one. So I think there were a couple of things in there. Let me know if I got any of it wrong. But the current workflow that you have set up is that you will have kind of an original version of your content. It's hosted, I think, in Enterprise, and then you create a view, like a literal view of that in Hub, in ArcGIS Online. That is common. I mean, effectively, if you have, let's say, data that may have one or two columns that are private and you don't want to showcase that, or you almost want to manage your content in one place and get it ready for open data use later, that does make sense. Again, for Hub, being a client application of ArcGIS Online, we reference just all of the items in all of the groups that have been shared to the site. That's part of the catalog. So any of those view items that you put in there would go automatically into the catalog. So I think that makes sense. If there's any other questions on configuration, I'm happy to talk, I think maybe in detail a bit more later as well. Yeah.
And we are right at the hour, which means the live stream is ending and our mics are being turned off. So if you have any other further questions, come see us or come visit us at the booth. And thanks again for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you.